everyone. Thanks for joining. We've got Marty, who will be hosting this session today.
Okay, everyone. Well, welcome to our very first Clarity Cast. We have a very exciting lineup and agenda for you today. We're going to go ahead and take a look at the agenda. But as I mentioned, this is Clarity Cast, and this is our very first AMA, Adapting to Federal Change to Protect Funding and Maximize Impact. For our agenda today, I'll be setting the landscape, telling you a little bit about Clarity Cast and our new endeavor with this webinar series. We'll talk about a few logistics for our event today, introductions of our wonderful panelists and friends, and then we'll dive right into the panel discussion. You all have driven the format for this because, as you recall, with your registration, you had an opportunity to ask your questions. And so we've shaped up an exciting agenda centered on those questions that are top of mind for you. We'll share a little bit of resources and things that we've been working on over here at Bitfocus before we wrap up with final remarks. And we are attempting to do this all within an hour, so it'll be action-packed for sure. What is Clarity Cast and what's bringing us here today? This is a brand new endeavor that we at Bitfocus have created to really bring more connection and community around our software and our products because we recognize exactly how transformational these technologies can be, but also that you as users introduce so much of the power. And so we want to build some community, and we're doing that through a series of engaging events called Clarity Cast. And we're seeking to bring together leaders and leading voices from across our industry in this fight against homelessness to really resource and tool us as a sector. We'll be coming together with industry experts, COC leaders, frontline workers, individuals with lived experience, and more. And our goals with creating this series is to really help you maximize funding, think through some other funding streams or avenues that can help you reach your mission to obviously make great connections and expand your network with one another. That's so important during this time. We hope that you'll pick up a few tricks of the trade that will all help you to stay not just one or two, but 3 steps ahead. That seems to be really critical here in this landscape that we're moving into. And so it's our hope that Clarity Cast helps position you in a place of confidence for this new environment that we're all navigating together. So that's a little bit about our event today, and we'll talk more about it at the wrap up and some opportunities for you to get deeper involved. Let's go ahead and talk about some logistics. Most importantly, participants are muted throughout today's call. But we do want to hear from you as we proceed through the webinar. So please do lean into that chat box. You can drop your comments or raise up any additional questions through the Q&A box. But we definitely want your dialogue and engagement throughout the discussion today. So please don't hesitate to, again, drop those comments in the chat box and your questions in the Q&A box. I've got Matt Olson here with us helping to man the chat box. And so while many of you submitted questions in advance, we are going to be taking live questions. I'm in the hope that we have some additional time to field some of those today. So those are a few logistics. Let's dive into a review of our speakers. We have 3 very exciting panelists who are no strangers to you all. If you all were with us in New Orleans, you got to hear from David and Cynthia. And last week we heard from these panelists at a remarkable NEH deep dive session that Cynthia helped us to coordinate. And so we are back this week with David, Cynthia, and Tamara. If these folks are new to you, it would be my privilege to provide a little bit of background and introduction, starting with David Everbach. David is our CEO at the Institute for Community Alliances. He oversees HMIS support and data analytics for communities in over 40 COCs across 15 states. He's known for his ability to turn complex data into clear strategies, working directly with local partners to maximize the use and benefits of HMIS. And David works directly with COCs to strengthen their infrastructure and secure funding, always grounded in technology. ethics, and real world outcomes. He also oversees COC support in 4 continua in 4 states. So thank you so much, David, for joining today and for all the expertise and insight that you will add into our conversation. We're also joined by Cynthia Nagendra. Cynthia has been working with communities on homelessness and HMIS system design for the past 15 years, including most recently as the Deputy Director of Strategy, Data Performance and Planning for San Francisco City and County Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. And throughout Cynthia's career, she's provided homelessness system design and improvement efforts to design data evaluation systems, lead strategic planning, and activate system change and data-driven approaches to reduce and end homelessness. Cynthia, as always, thank you so much for your time and expertise. And then our last panelist today is Tamara Kohler, who is the Executive Director of the Regional Task Force on Homelessness. And Tamara leads the homeless response system for the entire San Diego region. Prior to this, she was the leader in Seattle's homelessness strategy and investment division with the state of Utah's Housing and Community Development. She is a regular advisor to both local and national policymakers and brings deep experience in aligning resources with community needs. And lastly, my name is Marty Phillips, and I am the Director of Professional Services here at Bitfocus. And our department helps our customers to optimize clarity for your local response systems. And it's a true privilege to head up today's conversation. One thing that I want to make note of as we prepare to roll into this conversation is that all people are welcome in this space. This Clarity Cast and webinar is for all of us in the industry. It is not specific to one HMIS system or software. We are all truly here to learn together to advance the mission of homelessness. So if you found yourself here today and you're not on Clarity Human Services, you are welcome to. Let's go ahead and turn it over to talk about our objectives in the conversation that we are going to launch into. In our work to combat homelessness, we are consistently facing evolving landscapes, and I know that I don't need to tell you all that, but we're seeing current federal climates presenting challenges as well as potential opportunities, and that's the piece that I really am hoping we can lean into and engage with today. The questions that we'll be discussing are submitted, as I mentioned, by so many of you, and are reflecting the critical concerns that we're seeing and really some of the strategic considerations and how we navigate this and the questions that communities are grappling with. So specifically, we'll be diving into a few themes around understanding the current landscape and anticipating where we can, navigating the uncertainty, and really how we sustain our response and our efforts and our mission throughout this shift. And then lastly, we hope to spend a little bit of time discussing how we uphold those core values and really stay true to ourselves in this work despite the uncertainty. And so let's go ahead and dive in. Our first question is coming to us out of Riverside, California. And the question is, will HMIS funding be defunded or reduced in fiscal year 2026? And before I dive into this question, I want to give a little bit of context for those of you that are on the call and for our panelists today, recognizing that we are in a very complex legislative environment and none of us has the crystal ball. What we can say are a few knowns that the president's fiscal year 2026 budget contained a proposal to consolidate or collapse the COC program in exchange for a state-issued block grant through the Emergency Solutions Grant. So we've seen that language in the president's proposal and his budget, which is largely symbolic. That was not included in the big, beautiful bill. But we are, as well as that, moving into the appropriation season. So that's the context for the question. And I'm going to open it up to our panelists. And again, recognizing that we don't have a crystal ball here, but Tamara, Cynthia, and David, I'm wondering if you can share what's on your mind as you grapple with the unknowns and how are you preparing your systems as leaders?
I can just start to sort of explain. I think there's probably at least a good amount of confusion about what happened last week with the passage of the bill. and what comes forward. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background on that, and then I'm gonna, if I can, link in the chat. The National Alliance to End Homelessness has a little summary. They have a policy corner that kind of updates people on a regular basis on what's going on. So last week, we know Congress passed this mega bill. It is shrinking federal resources to healthcare. We're talking about a huge cut to Medicaid and other expanded work requirements and other bureaucratic hurdles, and a huge cut to food assistance. And so obviously the implementation of this bill has disproportionately harmful outcomes for a lot of the people that we serve. But there is a lot of confusion between the bill that Congress passed and the annual funding cycle for HUD's affordable housing and homelessness programs. As Marty mentioned, there is a proposal in the appropriations bill, which has not happened yet, to consolidate the COC and ESG programs, and that the president's budget request is where that came from. And so the other thing I think to keep in mind is there's also a potential NOFO that might come out for COC funds. Are only supposed to come out every 2 years, but there is some notice of a potential new NOFA coming up for FY 2025. So all of this is to say that there's a lot of things are up in the air. And so it's confirmed that HUD intends to run a new competition for 2025, but I would watch the developments of how that goes. And I think that the key thing to know is that there's a lot of time to advocate with your Congress members. And the Alliance has some material and tools on how to contact your Congress members if you're not sure how to do that. But essentially to talk about how the funding changes and how consolidating the COC and ESG program would change the way HMIS was funded. So that doesn't tell you exactly what to do, but it is really important to stay informed as much as you can. And also, I probably will repeat this a lot throughout the webinar, which is we are in constant uncertainty, and I think that causes anxiety. 100%. That understandably is going to cause a lot of anxiety, and you all are used to that now, certainly from the past several months. But I think anticipating the worst can be kind of paralyzing. So we can't assume that we know what's going to happen. We want to have a plan B and a plan C for how things might, if this happens, here's the sort of budget kind of scenario we might run. If this happens, this is the budget scenario we might run. We just have to be a little bit more prepared instead of kind of anxiously waiting for the terrible news. There might not be terrible news. There might be, we just don't know. So I think a lot of the work is trying to keep people as informed and prepared as they can without being paralyzed about always thinking about worst case scenario and everything, falling down around us. We have to decide which pieces, we can pick up and hold and move forward.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And really great insight there. Tamara and David, in response to that, I'm wondering if there's anything that you want to share about how you're planning for any of these proposed changes and the potential impacts to communities.
Couple things that I think are important. As Cynthia said, this big bill that was passed is for the fiscal year 2026. And most of us are working on grants that fund our HMIS, CES, and a lot of our programs, which was funding from 2023, 2024. And we are signing 2024, 2025 contracts through this year. We had expected that then there would be a very simple process to get the 2025 funding, because that was originally approved in a 2-year NOFO. And then this 2026. So what I'm trying to say is we have a little bit more of a runway than I think people are thinking it's a shorter runway. I think we have a little bit longer runway. So important, most of us are not going to be out of funding for HMIS no matter what changes in 2026 for a little bit of time. Secondly, HMIS data now is embedded in the way that we report on multiple things. So I am fairly confident that HMIS will need to continue to exist regardless of where it may receive its funding. HMIS reports and is part of the the planning for emergency solutions grants. So if worst case, all of this proposal happens, most likely under ESG, this data, because it's needed to report on previous years as well, will need to live somewhere. So I think one of the places I'm probably most confident, and I have about 20 years of experience in funding and overseeing funding and seeing our funding reduced and increased in new programs and different practices, that it will exist somewhere. So HMIS, I think, from someone who originally started as an HMIS administrator, it is now embedded not only in our federal, but many of our states as well. So even if there's some changes on a federal level, I believe we're in the state of California, it is deeply required for state funds to use HMIS, and it rolls up into some state funding. So from HMIS, one way or another, it will need to continue to exist. It most likely will continue to be funded somewhere in a federal level, regardless of how that funding source happens. So I think from a concern that it will be defunded or reduced, I don't believe it would be defunded because now it's so deeply embedded in reporting. And we're also required to report on grants that, closed a couple years ago. So HMIS has a longer runway. I would also say that if we see changes, then we'll need to think about our budgets differently. Do we get funding from states? Do we get more funding from users? Do we get different funding? So I think about HMIS and I'm just focusing on HMIS, not all of our continuum of care funding. I believe of all of the various things that we do, HMIS will be considered regardless as a key element that needs to be funded and with a key role, regardless if it's through COC funding or worst case block granted through ESG because the reporting is required.
Thank you so much for that. David, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add, so you both mentioned that we have some time. I'm a little more of apparently a glass half empty person for a change. Normally I'm the other way around. We do have some time. We don't have a lot of time. From my perspective, this is going to be a lot easier for us to get changed at the committee and before it gets any legs under it than it will be after it starts to get some momentum. And so everything we can do between now, and I mean this afternoon, tomorrow, Monday, Tuesday, to our legislators, particularly the House side right now, because that's where it's going to come from to start, we should be doing that legwork as much as possible so that ideally this doesn't even see the light of day when the budget comes out. And if it does see the light of day, that it can hopefully be adjusted, stricken before it gets a little momentum. So that's my personal bias. So we have time, but not a lot of time. We have control, not a lot of control, but we have some control here. This is the legislative process. We can reach out to our electeds. We should be reaching out to our electeds and making a fuss about this. Marty, you mentioned opportunities earlier. This is one of our opportunities. This is our time to broaden our advocacy network. This is the time to broaden the folks that care about these issues. A lot of times we're doing it all on our own and we're trying to raise these issues. We need to not hesitate to be reaching out to other folks in other areas of our communities. This will potentially impact many parts of our communities, and other folks should have a say in this, including realtors, chambers of commerce, downtown business associations, foundation folks, because all this is going to splash down in all those areas. So we need to be doing everything we can and trying to then also broaden the folks that are bringing that message, because not every one of our electeds wants to hear from us, unfortunately, but they might listen to the big car dealer in town, or they might listen to somebody else that has a little more pull. In terms of the NOFO process that's coming up, the only thing I would add there is, because of the language that's included in this upcoming NOFO about kind of broadening the treatment and broadening the faith-based community, I think it's wise for us to assume and plan that there will be some fundamental changes likely in how the pro rata is handled moving forward into this year. So depending on how your COC handles, particularly like HMIS, in some of our jurisdictions, we're like always put at the bottom of tier 1, which is fine. Other cases, we're scored competitively, and then we usually are kind of put toward the top. But if the pro rata, or if the floor of tier 1 changes from say 93 or 94% to 80% or something like that, your COCs are going to be feeling pressure to rearrange things in a slightly different way, and that could impact our HMIS grants as early as our next cycle. So just be aware of that and be paying attention and be, I guess, in communication with your COC folks to try to make sure that the HMIS work is protected.
Thank you so much for your thoughts on that, David. And I want to dig in just a little bit further here to see what we understand about the rationale behind the proposal to consolidate and to move the COC competition to the state level. Is there anything that you can understand about the why or that you've heard from leaders that are advocating for this shift that could help us to better tailor our messaging? Or is there messaging that you're leading with right now that you're finding success in that you would encourage others to pursue? And Tamara, I'm going to direct this question to you off the cuff because I know you've been doing a lot of this work.
Well, and I'm just going to pick up something, a little bit of a thread that David and both Cynthia said. I think people are already moving to the like when this happens. And I think it's important to remember that we do still have a lot of folks that are concerned about this because it was proposed, but without much information. There is very, very little framework around what is being proposed. And so, along with the National Alliance, I think the importance of understanding that the appropriation committees, one being THUD, they are still working on the budgets. They are still working on how this funding may come to our communities. And that's why it's important to be advocating. It's also important that we get sort of off the sidelines and on the field in this work because understanding most people are not wonky like me and would listen to an appropriations committee hearing. In listening to those hearings, I heard some people who are really champions who understand this work and are the folks that we should be reaching out to. And I think it's that, Marty. We've got to get more involved in really understanding how all of this comes together so that we can message very intentionally why a continuum of care is so critical in your community, why being a local facilitator, convener, data expert, everyone looks to the COC to do a bunch of the behind the scenes work without giving much credit to the COC as sort of the primary thread that stitches all of this work together. And so I think we need to get comfortable with being out front and talking about the deep body of work that's done from continuums of care, and especially things like our HMIS teams and the data and the space. All research is done on this, right? Community direction, council members, counties, states, all look to information that comes from continuums of care, from our HMIS, point in time counts. All of those things are really critical. And we've made some significant progress in getting planning dollars, a little bit more funding for HMIS and coordinated entry in the last couple of years. How profoundly disruptive it would be if we lose that funding. So there's great risk if we move from one consistent funding source that is one of the most competitive, monitored, and watched funding sources for vulnerable populations that exist in the federal government to something that is block granted, which is not watched in the same way. It isn't a local sort of level of feedback and is really important. So I think it's time for us to get really intentional about our messaging and the purpose and the value of why we can have so many continuums of care across the nation and still say, if you've seen one continuum of care, you've seen one continuum of care. Why? Because it's so locally focused. We also can bring in philanthropic dollars. We can move through different political environments and stay strong and central in the work that we do. And those are some of the core things that a continuum of care, and especially our HMIS work, does. It is this sort of non-political bedrock to addressing homelessness in a way that doesn't happen within block grants. And I think the other challenge is when you push all of this to block grants, it takes the federal government's intention out of the work and pushes it to states. But states a lot of times don't track it in the same way. So I think it's also lifting up how hard it is that we work in this competitive space. I mean, most people wouldn't know what pro rata means unless if you're in a continuum of care, and how all of that comes out really matters. So I think it's a time that if you don't understand a lot of the things we're talking about, it's important to educate yourself rapidly and then lean into what the strength is about it, because you just can't be on the sidelines anymore. If we want to not only preserve and protect the importance of local control and competitive processes and investing what works in our communities, but having data that supports it, performance that we can measure, and really this collective approach. And we need to be messaging that. And I'll just pull on what David said, to lots of people who traditionally don't talk about our work. That is so important.
Absolutely. Now is the time for perhaps some unconventional partners. Cynthia, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I just want to call out as I do that Cynthia has been sharing lots of wonderful information in the chat about the NEH's advocacy hub. It can be really overwhelming to take up these advocacy responsibilities. And so if you're in that camp and deeply want to participate in advocacy, but feel a little uncertain about your messaging, make that your first stop. Dig into some of those resources that Cynthia has been sharing in the chat. Any other thoughts you want to share?
Thanks, Marty. I'm really going to pick up a thread that Tamara and David have both mentioned, but I was also thinking of accountability to sort of, I think our field is gotten so professionalized and so complex because we've made a lot of progress in how we do things, but we're using this very specialized language that's very difficult for lay people, electeds to understand. So we have to sort of simplify our messaging and try to speak lay speak. And I know a lot of you are become very good at that, but we can start to speak in acronyms and, all sorts of lingo that's really very internal to our field. And we kind of have to broaden our way of talking about things. I saw someone just put in the chat about housing first, and I think we hopefully can address that in a bit more deeply, like kind of the attacks on it. But I think it's also sort of a language thing around accountability. So the idea is, okay, well, there's still homelessness. Obviously, this isn't working, so we have to throw everything out the window and go back to the 80s and how we used to do things then. Well, things weren't working then. That's why we developed these systems, and we actually started making progress, and we started lowering homelessness. The issue we always have to remind folks is that it's not the interventions that aren't working. There's tons of research that shows that, and now we have the data because of HMIS to show that progress, but it's the lack of funding, the amount of funding that we get to do what we do is just usually not enough, right? And all the other reasons that it's difficult to kind of move the needle. However, and the problem has changed. The problem has become bigger. It's not like it's been the same group of people we've been trying to house for 20 years. People forget that. So, all of that is difficult to kind of say quickly and simply. So we have to simplify our messaging. And accountability is seemingly the things that locally we really get pressured around. This is why we have HMIS in the first place. And as Tamara mentioned, the HUD COC grant program is the biggest individual grant program of any federal agency. There's over 8 to 9,000 grantees that HUD individually contracts with. And so the accountability piece is really, we're able to monitor, we're able to compete for these grants. I'm just repeating what Tamara said, but I do think accountability speaks a language or responds to things that people actually care about that are outside of our field, to say, if there's no HMIS, we in no way can tell you how things are going. And there's really no real way to show if we're doing well or not doing well, or how much money a certain community should get or not get. I mean, we'd be in the dark, right? So I think we have to talk about things in that way. In the way in a company, if you didn't have data to say how your products are doing or what you're selling, how could you make adjustments that would make any sense? So it's a very basic idea. And that also, yes, we are going to be encouraging, and if you're not already, looking for diversified funding, not to just rely only on federal funds, state funds, but really to try to diversify. I think that's also what people want to hear.
Last thing I'll add on messaging, to pick up again all these threads. HUD is cutting the field office staff. They have to implement these contracts. So this is really a functional reality. It's hard to manage this many contracts. So this is a way to reduce the contracts. So that's the why, I think, by and large. The messaging that I think is critical to put it in terms that we've all heard recently that you can use, and it's not just for HMIS, I would say it's the structure of all three pieces of the COC planning, the coordinated entry, and the HMIS. These are the things that help ensure that we don't have to deal with fraud, waste, and abuse. this is a very competitive. These are monitored. It's evaluated. Folks are doing really good work with these dollars. So if you need to have a message, I would put it back in those terms, because that seems to be, a lot of the buzzwords right now.
Yeah, and if I could, David, I do the why. This is my own speculation. I agree that it's there's a huge reduction of federal workers who can do this. There was a really small office that could do this in the first place, and that's getting diminished. But also, the state block grant programs give the states a lot of power, and it takes it away. To be honest, it takes it away from localities and from individual grantees, communities. HUD a long time ago thought it's better to give those communities discretion because they know their communities best, and it made a lot of sense. Whereas you don't see the kinds of impacts with the block grants that we see in the COC program. But I do think it's a little bit of also removing some of that direct assistance and direct control that we get in the COC program.
Thank you for sharing all of those thoughts. And I think all of us on this call today are very knowledgeable about what we stand to lose and could potentially lose as a result of this shift. And I do want to pivot just a little bit to explore if there are any areas of opportunity that we see as a result of this shift. I mean, as you all know, disruptions of this kind almost always also present opportunities. And so our mission is going to continue regardless of these landscape changes. And I'm wondering, how you as leaders are thinking about this. And do you see any new avenues that are opening up or any new partnerships, any new opportunities because of the place and the context that we find ourselves in? And that's a heavy question. So I'll let y'all sit with that and then just dive in.
I can just start. I know that Tamara and David are probably gonna have a lot more to say about this, but healthcare has been, this huge developing partnership, especially in the Medicaid expansion states. I can't say that I know what's going to happen with these cuts to Medicaid. It's pretty daunting, but a lot of states like California, and I know not everyone is in California, but there are a lot of other states who have really embedded these expansion and Medicaid dollars into their funding streams, even for homelessness programs, homeless systems. And so healthcare and healthcare managed HMOs and managed care organizations have really wanted to partner with homeless systems to be able to share data, consolidate data, so that we can start billing Medicaid for different kinds of services that are now allowable and eligible. And I do think that those are well underway, and states are actually funding a lot of that too. They're pulling down Medicaid dollars, yes, but there's funding going into it from actual healthcare organizations and companies. So I do think that those companies still are very invested in serving folks, but also they have their foundations related to a lot of those, like for example, Blue Shield, or there's a number in California and that work in other states, but Blue Shield is one of them that I know we partner with in our local healthcare managed organizations are indeed putting funding specifically into data. And I think that's one place, and where also you can sort of really see where some of the philanthropy dollars are going from those healthcare. A lot of them have foundations, so that's just one area. But I'm sure, I know that there's many, many more.
David and Tamara, anything that you'd like to share on this question?
I can chime in, just pick up the Medicaid thread a little bit. One of our states, Wisconsin, is just got through the Medicaid waiver process, so that they can actually have services paid through Medicaid costs for homeless services. We don't know how this is going to shake down with these changes, so now it's a bit of a wait and see. I believe contracts are in place for at least a fixed period of time, so nothing that happened in the other bill is going to immediately affect that, but in the long term, we just don't know. So that's certainly true.
I think it's an opportunity for us to find more partners in this work, right? I think it's the space when people will say that government should be covering all of this. Continuums of care, we know we need a 25% match for all of our funding. Like, it's time for us to really lean into not only, I think, the healthcare, but some of our local foundations. And it's a space where some of the most successful communities who have addressed homelessness and had reductions have had a real local investment strategy. right? I'm just going to lift up Miami-Dade that has a tax that funds a lot of their work. And maybe it's a great opportunity and time for us to really double down on local investment, on what it looks like to really fund the things that communities want to fund and do the things that they want to do. Because the flip side of the coin is if we don't have federal funding, but we have communities that still want to address this, and I don't believe our federal funding is completely going away, but there's an opportunity then to say, what do we want to do locally and how do we fund that? There's incredible, I think, time to not be so government speak and be more local communication and bringing people into this space. Because what's been probably the silver lining of this storm cloud is people saying, how are you doing and what are you going to do if you don't have funding? People who don't fund us, people who are just interested in how this is going to be disruptive. And when you start talking about the loss of funding for people in housing, especially an aging population, there's a lot of interest in how do we take care of that population? What do we do? So I think there's opportunity for us to think about who are other partners who maybe have been on the sidelines. How do we look at local support, understanding that we're in California, our state has a budget issue, our county has a budget issue, our jurisdictions have budget issues. But we also know that I'll just say the most successful ones have gotten like a funding source, a tax or something, which has allowed them to weather sort of the federal and state up and down. So we have to have those conversations now very intentionally and find out who's really interested in being a part of the solution, not coming to save us, but a part of the solution. Right? Not bailing us out because we don't know how to manage our money or how to think about changes in our fiscal space, but really being able to have that conversation about join us in this work and how great it would be to have more local investment or control to be able to do this. And I think that's an incredible opportunity. I've had more conversations in the last 60 days with folks who now are saying, what do we do if we don't have this funding? Which is actually a really great conversation that we weren't having before when they felt like, you're flush and maybe not good stewards of federal dollars. So
And that's the opportunity that you just created as a result of this environment and your local system, Tamara. I'm wondering if I can jump right back in with a follow-up question for you, just about is there an existing strategy that you leveraged when you pursued these new conversations? Or is there anything that we can glean from you today in that pursuit that would help us hold those conversations in our own local communities?
Well, I think it's interesting because the press can be an incredible partner in this space. Your local, chambers, your local folks that are talking about staff within your city councils, like they a lot of times didn't understand what we do or what the funding is, but it is in the press. So really partnering with that to have some very intentional conversations. And I'm going to point you back to a bunch of the resources that Cynthia put in the chat. You don't have to figure out how to talk about it. There's actually been some really great work happening at the National Alliance and others about messaging the need to think about it locally and be able to get more partners in this space. Something will change, but we've been through changes of funding. If you've been doing this long enough and sort of changes in and different types of funding, this is just an opportunity for us to bring, I think, attention to what's working in our community. We've been doing a lot in diversion funding. It's not federally funded that has gotten a lot of attention. We've been able to pull $1.5 million just for diversion funding from our philanthropic partners. And they're asking how can they do more of that and put more money into it. So I think it's a different conversation. We are not out there just with a handout asking for support to cover our federal funding. We're also asking to invest in proven strategies. And I think that's important, something that Cynthia, you said, this is becoming a very professional field. We're getting very good at knowing what works, and the HMIS data proves it. And we're getting much better at using it on a monthly or quarterly basis, not just a point in time count. Now we've got all of these things. So I think it's also using our data, our measures, our accountability as ways to show that we're a good investment and a place to really trust to put your resources and have those conversations and do it in social media, do it in your press. You got to be willing to get out there and talk about it.
Absolutely. And Cynthia, David, I welcome your thoughts as well. If you've really honed any strategies or found success in your messaging within your communities that you would like to share for others as they work to further their own?
There's no easy answer here. There's no consistent answer here. So every state's going to be a little bit different. Some states are supporting things in a way that other states won't even consider. So Tamara's point about looking locally may be necessary if you've got communities that are that inclined. So it's going to have to be kind of working every level. Another messaging component, though, I think we might want to be thinking about is that, particularly in light of the Medicaid cuts and the influx of folks that we can anticipate coming, this feels like one of these moments where the feds made a decision that's going to have a negative effect, and they're going to then hand this off to the state and say, now it's your problem and your mess to clean up. And I think it's important for us to remind our state and local leaders that the people that are going to be knocking at your door are going to be the mayor. The mayors are going to get the phone calls. The local elected officials are going to get the phone calls when they start to see people in parks and in doorways and things like that. So the feds need to own the mess that they've created by cutting Medicaid and not hand it off to the state and the locals to then try to clean it up.
Thank you for that response.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to underscore what has already been really beautifully articulated about strategies. I think, I mean, my local community is San Francisco, so we do have a lot of private funding here. So I don't want to say that that's applicable everywhere, but I have been overall kind of impressed, surprised, like grateful that corporate giving in this time of upheaval has in a lot of areas stepped up. Yes, some people are, worried about funding certain activities, but I think our asks have to be really specific and really thoughtful and maybe change somewhat how we ask for what we're asking for. But philanthropy and private giving has always filled the gaps, as someone said in the chat. And because we've never been given all the funds we need from the federal government to do the work we need to do. So we've always been very resourceful about how to find those funds. And I do think that the messaging that we have, I mean, I think we have to think about how to, instead of being such a defensive stance, like, no, we've been doing great work. I mean, we have, but I think we have to talk about what a good future looks like when we have a thriving community where everyone is housed and the mayor isn't called every 5 minutes about somebody on their block that's causing an issue for a neighbor or whatever the issue is. And that's a real concern. I don't say that that's not real. I just think that we have so much in our field had to think about, we're talking about a really sad, difficult issue. And I've been trying more and more, at least locally here, to kind of create a more positive picture of how people can participate in making their community for everybody healthy. We're not just giving it to these folks or these folks. Yes, these, we think of them as our folks because we care for them and they care for us, but I'm trying to be more inclusive about, look, this lifts the rising tide lifts all boats. I think that's the saying, right? That it's really about making a healthy community for everybody. And we don't have to get so particular about the homeless system. We have to talk about how the fact that over 50% of people in most communities are extremely rent burdened. Like, everybody's having trouble paying the rent. And now that the economy is shaky, those concerns are rising to a much bigger swath of the population. And Medicaid is definitely going to make a difference. I mean, there's a huge amount of Americans who access those resources. And I think what we're trying to do more is saying, it's more expansive and inclusive and comprehensive to think about our whole community as a big, healthy place that we want to build, and trying to create visions of a more positive impact that we're trying to make. And that's where partnerships with education, corporate, private, justice has not gotten a lot of cuts. And we have been very successful in partnering with the justice system here locally to do all kinds of things because they want their folks housed too. They need help and they have funds, but they don't know how to, they don't always have the expertise or the capacity to house folks and do data polls. And so we've been supportive and we've built some really good relationships here in Justice because they are actually usually getting more resources. So I just want to say that I'm trying to think about this as more of a kind of positive vibe to moving
I
forward.
love that messaging of well-being for everyone because it really removes some of the stigma that's attached to the messages that we typically lean with. And I think that's a great place for ending the conversation on policy. In our last remaining minutes, we're going to shift to talk a little bit about how we uphold our values. And we had a question come in from a participant in Lincoln, Nebraska, wondering about how we can ensure our data, including but not limited to HMIS data, isn't misused to target the vulnerable people that we serve. I know that we've addressed this question many times, but I do think it's a core message that we do need to keep reassuring and keep repeating to folks. And so I'm wondering if there's anything that you want to share about the strategies that you're undertaking to ensure that participant data is protected within your systems. And we also have the resources that we'll share after the following of this.
I'll go, and I know David's got a lot. I think it's important, and this is a great space to talk to HMIS administrators. We have privacy policies for a reason. We have consent for a reason. We are very purposeful in how this information is collected and protected, and always go back to who has access for what purpose and why. We hold very closely to the fact that the HMIS system is about helping end people's homelessness. It's not about collecting everything about everybody. And so we've been really careful, and I'll just remind everyone, we're a border community. So we've been very careful to only collect the things that are required. Citizenship's not required for many of that. So we don't keep in our system things that are not necessary for that very reason, so that they are not access for any other purpose than to address homelessness. We also had someone, in our community that was looking to access the data under saying it was a public record. And so we did a very intentional AAQ to HUD about that and how to respond to that. And we've shared it with Bitfocus. You guys are welcome to share it as well. And it is really specific. And I think that's part of it. We have been given clear pathway and practice on privacy and security. It's also important that we believe very much in doing no harm. This system is created to get people to the services they need. We have an open sharing system with our providers so that people don't have to tell their stories over and over, but not to expose people to sharing information that is not required to do their work. So how you teach, how you train, how you set it up. Hold to those practices and be very, very clear about it. And it is okay to push back on requests. It is okay to seek further guidance. We've even taken it to our attorneys. Not everybody has that opportunity. And I will also say, because I work for the state of Utah and we had a statewide HMIS in the state of Utah, just because we were in state government did not give departments within the state access to HMIS. Right? There is still policies and practices around them. So I'm just going to encourage you to go back to what you have in writing, what your clients have consented to share, because we do data integration where purposeful and for very specific reasons, but access is, I think, the really critical piece.
Thank you so much, Tim.
I'll just add a little plug for being proactive in this time, making sure you're having those conversations with your legal team ahead of time, so you know what you're supposed to be doing, and then also reminding and training your end users ahead of time what they're supposed to do. Because where this can really hit the road is when someone gets a late night visit and someone panics and they do something that they're not supposed to do. So we need to be proactive and remind our end users of what the protocols are. And the biggest one is there a warrant? and let me talk to my lawyer before we do anything else. So make sure that happens. And then just in general, just the reminder, we should always be putting we talked about this last week, but the why in front of all of this. Why are we asking this information? Functionally, what's going to be different because we're collecting this information? If we can't answer that, if it's not helping our clients, then we probably should not be collecting that information.
Yeah. Thank you so much, David, for raising up a key point that I just really want to reinforce and ensure that everyone hears. And that is, if you have any uncertainty about a request for access or authorization, your best course of action is to withhold and to seek additional guidance and clarity from your immediate supervisor or from your legal counsel before releasing. And so that is just really, really critical to protect the information that we have in the system of those that we serve. Cynthia, any final thoughts before we turn back and share a few resources?
I love one of the questions in the chat. There's a lot of great questions in the chat. I'm sorry we can get to all of them, and I hope we can respond to them afterwards and send out some answers. But there is one question. Yes, all of this is happening, and there's a lot of uncertainty. But what are kind of the areas of opportunity for positive transformation and local innovation? I mean, I think that is the best place to focus is, let's be honest, there's some things about the way this programs ran that we didn't like.
Yeah.
It's not we were like, oh, I can't wait for another NOFO. We were just sort of trying to, respond, and they are structured in such a smart way. I don't mean to say that it's not been, I've been working in this field 15, 20 years. Like, I've seen the thought and the best practice and the response to local, needs that have been embedded in these processes, but they're onerous, and so I think it's it's some of the folks I work with, I try to do a lot more going back to like an open space of creativity. If you could create the system, the program, the funding stream that you wanted, what would that look like? And if it wasn't just remove a lot of the oppressive feelings of like, we can't, and ask ourselves like, okay, just even if it's a half day with your teams, what can we do? And even if we don't know what's coming, let's just live in a open-ended world where we could do anything. What would that look like? It's amazing what can be sparked in those discussions. And also it just feels good to like expand your mind and thinking and creativity and get back into, yes, we're problem solving, but we're also trying to come up with new solutions. So even if these aren't real life scenarios, I do think that there's a lot that we could be doing better, reconstruct programs better, design ways, that things could flow better. And this is an opportunity to do that because things are changing. It's like during COVID where everything was just, you had to kind of put it together. And we got some of the best work during those times because we had to be fast, we had to be creative and innovative. And I think similarly, difficult situations, as we all know, create the best innovation. So I really do think that there's a lot of opportunities for sitting with your team and taking off all the caps and thinking, what could we be doing differently, even if it doesn't come to pass?
Thank you so much for that final piece of encouragement as we wrap up today, Cynthia. I think that's the best possible place that we can end this conversation on. And I don't know about you all, but I feel more hopeful and more optimistic every time I'm in the same space with you all. So thank you for all of the knowledge and insight and comfort that you've brought to all of us today. It means so much to us at Bitfocus, and I'm sure to the panelists that you would set aside time just to share your thoughts. I do want to share some resources with everyone now that I've found how to use my PowerPoint. We have at Bitfocus been putting some energy and focus into developing a privacy and security toolkit. I will drop the link to that in the chat for you all. And really, there are a ton of resources that are included. If you haven't already checked this out, please take some time to do so. I also want to hear from you all as a part of this. As I mentioned today, this is a part of a brand new series that we're launching at Bitfocus. We hope to have Clarity Cast on a quarterly basis. And so we'd love to hear from you about your experience today. please do take a few minutes, scan that QR code. We've got, less than 10 questions on that form. I'll just take a few minutes of your time to hopefully make more compelling content for you that really speaks to the place that you're in and the questions that you're grappling with. And we just thank you all for joining today and for your time, your engagement in the chat. And please do let us know how we can support you in whatever comes next. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time and attention today. And thank you to our panelists. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.